I'm Suruti.
I'm Hannah.
And welcome back to Red Handed. Happy New Year.
Happy 2020 foe. Hopefully it will be
a merry one. So yes, by the time you're listening to this, Hannah and I will have had 2 glorious weeks off to just lay on our sofas and eat potatoes covered in custard or whatever else we want to do. But in real life, reality, right now, this very second as we hit record, it's actually still December. And Hannah and I sat here staring at each other, not in any way really filled with any festive spirit, putting off getting into this week's case because it's horrific, mind-boggling in its brutality, and just plain shocking as to how it was allowed to happen in the first place. The murder of Sarah Everard in 2021 became one of the biggest, most notorious and most publicised cases in UK criminal history. It appalled a nation already reeling from months of being on lockdown and deepened the public's distrust of the police, to an extent that the London Metropolitan, in particular, may never recover. If you are British, you know this story. Everyone else, prepare yourselves.
At 5:50 p.m. on the 3rd of March 2021, a year into the UK's shambolic COVID lockdowns, 33-year-old Sarah Everard left her house to go to her friend's place for dinner. Then she left her friend's house in Clapham Junction, South East London, at 9 p.m. and set off on the 2-mile walk back to her home in Brixton. CCTV cameras picked up Sarah cutting through Clapham Common, which is a big urban park. And during her walk, Sarah called her boyfriend Josh and spoke with him on the phone for 14 minutes. They planned to meet up the next day. But Sarah would never show up. Her friends, family, and Josh tried desperately to get in touch with Sarah, but all of their messages went unread, and all their calls unanswered. So, on the 4th of March 2021, Josh called the police.
If you don't know this case, let me tell you now. Throughout this entire saga, the police were largely outed for their incompetence, corruption, and cover-ups, for reasons that will become painfully obvious very soon. But we do have to give credit where credit is due. The officers who investigated Sarah Everard's disappearance did an outstanding job. As soon as Sarah was reported missing, they were on it. They took her disappearance incredibly seriously, and they started investigating immediately. Detectives put out a call for CCTV and any dashcam footage from anyone who had been driving around the area of Clapham on the night that Sarah vanished. They then ploughed through over 1,800 hours of footage to piece together what had happened to the 33-year-old marketing executive.
And using the CCTV recordings, investigators were able to almost step for step retrace Sarah's movements. 26 minutes after leaving her friend's home, she was spotted on a street called Cavendish Road. 6 minutes later, at 9:32 p.m, the camera on board a bus captured Sarah on the side of the road, speaking with a man. The man appears to be showing her something in his hand. Another 6 minutes later, at 9:38 p.m, witnesses reported seeing Sarah Everard getting into a car. She was handcuffed.
This set alarm bells blaring. So the police checked the car's registration, only to discover that it was a hire car, and it had been rented not in London, but almost 80 miles away in the town of Dover, on the far southeast coast of England. And it had been rented by a 48-year-old man named Wayne Couzens. So just 6 days after Sarah went missing, investigators had Wayne Couzens on their radar, which in a stranger homicide is very fast. But they had to be sure that this was their man. So investigators checked the CCTV from the car rental shop, and bingo, there he was. Couzens was a perfect physical match for the man who had put Sarah in handcuffs and then into the back of his car on the night that she vanished. He was even wearing the same exact clothes when he was hiring the car as when he was spotted by that bus camera taking Sarah. It was a huge breakthrough. But it also must have no doubt brought with it a deep feeling of horror for the officers who tracked this man down. Because Wayne Couzens, the now prime suspect in the disappearance of Sarah Everard, a story that was already dominating the headlines, was a serving London Metropolitan police officer.
In fact, Couzens was part of an elite team within the London Met. He was a member of the Parliamentary Diplomatic Unit, an armed response team charged with protecting top diplomats and politicians, as well as guarding embassies. And at 7 a.m. on the 3rd of March, the day Sarah Everard disappeared, Wayne Couzens had just finished a 12-hour shift at the US Embassy. He called his wife, in the lovely town of Deal, Kent, and told her that he had to work an extra shift so he wouldn't be home that night. But that was a lie. Wayne Couzens left work and drove to Dover, parked his car on the quiet street of North Military Hill, and then went to pick up his rental car. He used his real name, and he didn't even try and hide his face from the CCTV cameras in the car shop.
Now, some people wonder why he did this. Why didn't he try and obscure his face? Why didn't he try and hide? Why didn't he try and hire a car in a way that he didn't even have to go into a shop and be caught on CCTV? He was a cop. Surely he knew he was on camera. Now, I don't really have an answer for this, other than he was so supremely confident maybe that he'd get away with it and that he didn't care. I really don't know, because it's such a stupid mistake to make. But another question is, why get the rental car at all if he was so obviously going to link that rental car back to himself anyway? I don't know. I think the only answer I can give as to why he even bothered to get a rental car, given that he hires it in his own name, etc., is because I think he knew that his own car, which was a bit of a banger, may have made an intended victim be less likely to get into his car. Like, if you drive up in a shitty car and then tell somebody they're under arrest and you're an undercover plainclothes officer, they're going to have a few more red flags going off if you're driving around an old banger. So I think that's the reason for the hire car, because he absolutely makes no attempts whatsoever to de-link himself from the rental car. And I also just want to say, what a massive, like, sliding doors moment that the police even get that break. Because if that bus hadn't driven past Wayne Couzens at the exact moment he's talking to Sarah Everard and showing her something in his hand, and then you can match it with the eyewitnesses that saw her getting into his car, those eyewitnesses never would have remembered the registration. The registration is only known because that bus happens to drive past them at that exact moment.
So, after getting that upgrade, Couzens drove his hire car almost 3 hours from Dover to London, stopping on his way to fill up his vehicle with 30 litres of petrol, which is enough fuel for a very long journey. So clearly, by this stage, he already had a lot of driving planned. Once in southwest London, Wayne Couzens was caught on cameras at a Tesco buying hairbands. Couzens is totally bald, so why he needed these hairbands is theorised to be for a very grim reason. Some have speculated, including law enforcement, that Couzens brought these hairbands in order to prolong an erection. That's horrific. I didn't know that.
So after this, ANPR, which is automatic number plate registration technology, caught Couzens driving around the Earl's Court area in London for almost an hour. He didn't seem to be going anywhere in particular. He didn't look lost. He just drove around and around. We know now that Officer Wayne Couzens was stalking. He was out there that night looking for someone, anyone who fit the bill. He was on the hunt that night for a victim. And that's exactly what he's doing in Earl's Court. Like, if you don't know where this story ends, his behaviour looks really odd. But he's out there looking for somebody that he can take. And he had already planned exactly what he was going to do. He has the hairbands. Police also later discovered that he had had a kill kit in that rental car. A kit that he had been putting together over months. It contained the police issue handcuffs that he'd bought online and then used on Sarah, as well as a roll of self-adhesive carpet protector and Velcro straps.
By 9:30 p.m, as Sarah was walking home, Couzens had given up on Earl's Court and was driving over Battersea Bridge, heading straight in Sarah's direction. Couzens first encountered Sarah when they both ended up on Pointers Road in Clapham. And this is where Couzens stopped Sarah Everard. On the bus camera footage, officers could see that he was showing Sarah something in his hand, and it turned out to be his Metropolitan Police ID. And he used that ID to falsely arrest Sarah, telling her that she was in breach of COVID lockdown rules and that she needed to go with him to the police station. And by 9:38 p.m, Couzens has got Sarah in his car with her hands handcuffed behind her back, and he begins driving away. But he's not headed to the local police station. He drove, and no doubt terrified and trapped Sarah Everard 80 miles back to Dover. I think it's important to say, like, that people were getting arrested for being outside.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It was
we come on to that. Fucking hell. It's horrific.
Such a violent time.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this story is infuriating for multi-layers of reasons, but we will come back to that shortly. For now, I want to talk about Sarah and the intense fear that she must have been when she was in that car. 80 miles, 3 hours, he drove her back to Dover. I can't even imagine how scared she must have been. It's absolutely, I don't even know what the word is, gut-wrenching to think when she must have realised that Couzens wasn't taking her to the police station. At what point did she realise? And also, this is something that I heard Emma Kenny, who is a pretty well-known psychologist here in the UK. If you've ever seen any UK true crime documentary, Emma Kenny is probably being interviewed in it. We love Emma Kenny. Fabulous, fabulous makeup. She's always got fabulous makeup on. She made this point, and honestly, when I heard her say it, I was like, oh my fucking God, that is horrific. Because how was he with her? That's 3 hours is a long time to spend in the car with somebody, and she's completely immobilized. Her hands are handcuffed behind her back. There is nothing she can do. How was he with her? Did he taunt Sarah now that he had her in his car and knew that there was no way she could get out? Did Wayne Couzens get off on scaring Sarah and watching her panic like a sadist? Or maybe did Couzens just completely ignore her, freaking her out with his lack of responses? I also can't even imagine being locked in a car with this man and he just stops responding to you. We don't know. Or maybe he tried to keep her calm. Maybe he tried to tell her everything was going to be fine. I don't know. We just don't know what happened. All we do know is that Sarah, like I said, had her hands cuffed behind her back. It's not like she could even have fought as Wayne Couzens drove. He, by this point, was in complete control. So there is no doubt in my mind that Sarah spent those hours absolutely petrified. And there's no way that during that journey she didn't realise the immense level of danger she was in, whatever Wayne Couzens was saying to her. So given all of the footage that they now had, officers decided it was time to pay their colleague, Wayne Couzens, a little visit.
And this police interview is one of the strangest we've ever come across. Let's have a listen now.
So we're here to talk to you about Sarah. I'm going to show you a picture. Do you know Sarah?
I don't know.
Okay. Sarah went missing. I'll show you some pictures of her on the day.
Okay.
Sarah went missing on Wednesday, and her parents obviously and her family are really worried about her. The inquiry that's been conducted so far has led us to come and speak to you about it and to see what you know about Sarah. Okay. So, would you like to? Do you know where Sarah is?
No.
Right. Okay. Do you know anything about what happened to her?
I know that she went missing up in London somewhere, about a week ago or so, just from what I got on the news.
Okay. Have you ever personally met her?
No, not personally, no.
Have you had any interactions with her at all?
No, why would I have personal interactions with her?
Well, it's very difficult because I can't go into a lot of the evidence because obviously that's not part of what an urgent interview is, okay? This interview is just about trying to find her. Because
Sure.
she's been missing for a while now.
I'm sat in handcuffs and I know her, so you must have something to say that I know her.
Well, as I said, you've been arrested on suspicion of kidnap, and we believe that you've been involved in her disappearance and taking her away from her family.
Okay.
So we are trying to find her. Obviously, everybody is very worried about her. She's got, parents. She's got she's siblings. She's got a girlfriend. There's a lot of people that care about her.
Sure.
You've seen her on the news, the number of people that are reaching out about her.
Sure.
out there looking for her every day, and she's missing. And our primary job here is to find her, and to try and find her safe and well.
Okay.
Now, we believe that you know something about where she is, and that's why we're here, to look for her and to try and find her. And that's why we're talking to you now, is to try and get you to have a good think about it, and tell us anything you can about where the mother.
At this point, Couzens knows that the jig is up, and he caves very quickly. But he doesn't exactly admit to what he's done. Instead, he now starts making a series of strange claims about an Eastern European people trafficking gang.
Okay, well, I am in financial, and I've been lent on by, I don't know who they are. They're a group, a gang, whatever, and they told me, right, I need to go and pick up girls and give them to them. So I said, not happening, and it then came through that they're going to harm my family, take them away, and they'll use them instead. At that point I had no option to try and find somebody. So I don't, there's a couple of names. I was told a place to take her. That's it. That is all I know to this group of people.
Tell me about them. I need to find them. Tell me everything you know that I
Okay.
think that you'll help me.
There was a white Sprinter van. They it was between sort of Lenham, Maidstone area that I dropped her off. I still don't know. I don't know. They just I just parked my car up, and then the van come up behind me, flashed me. They all jumped out, and then they took this girl. They said, you've done good, and I don't know whether my family's going to be alright still, but they threatened to take my family away from me. So at that point, I'm doing what I can to protect my family. That's it. So all I know is that it was a roundabout. We could drive there now. I could show you. But roughly, I don't know Lenham, Maidstone area at all.
If you did it on Google, Maps, like Google Earth, if we drove it, would you be able to do it?
I drove from Ashford to Maidstone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There's a roundabout that breaks up, I guess. So this is the first big roundabout that you come to. You would carry straight over to Maidstone, but instead I went round that roundabout and back up another road. And at that point, I was flashed and pulled over. Guys got out, opened my door, opened that door, pushed me out against the front of the car, took the girl, drove off. That's it. They said, we'll be in touch. So I'm here, I'm off work with stress because I'm here to protect my family. I want to be here 24/7 for my family. They come from my family. I've got nothing myself. I've got no choice.
I'll go back through the route with you in a minute, alright? But how do they contact you? How did you contact them?
I tried to take over one of their call girls and rip her off. So she's told them, and they've got me. So
how do they? No, but how do they contact you? How is it they've been in contact with you to make these threats?
They just tell me, be here. So Hotel Burston down in Folkestone, got to be here. Okay, so I turned up. I've got no mobile number, and they have got my mobile number.
They haven't.
They're obviously outside watching, following. Honestly.
How are they telling you to be there? How is it they're leaving in those directions?
Yeah, they'll come outside. So they'll be outside here.
Yeah.
And then they'll say, right, you're going to be in Folkestone at this time, or you're going to be in Ashford at this time. That's it. There's no links, no telephone numbers. I'm completely on my own, but at the same time being threatened. It had Romanian plates on the van, white, like Mercedes Sprinter type van.
Okay, so what we have here is a man who has a prepared narrative. This whole Eastern European gang thing wasn't just dreamt up on the spot. Couzens knew that they might come for him. In fact, just 35 minutes before the police knocked at his door, Couzens did a full factory reset on his mobile phone. This has led to a lot of speculation that he was tipped off by someone inside the investigation. And that may well be true. It does feel like quite a large coincidence. And we all know that the Met are all out for each other. But it is just speculation. We have no public proof of Couzens receiving any sort of heads up from another police officer, but would we?
But getting back to the interview at his house, it's so interesting to listen to Couzens. He's so obviously lying. In the video, because obviously you guys are just listening to the audio version, but we will post a link to the video so you can go watch it. You can see how hard he's breathing the whole time he's being questioned, even though he's not speaking. The officers are just questioning him. You can literally see his entire chest rising and falling with the fear and the panic that is coursing through him. And in a classic move, after Wayne Couzens realises that the detectives know it was him, he starts to minimise. With this whole Eastern European gang thing, he turns himself into the victim. He was being blackmailed by a gang. They had threatened his family. What could he possibly do? Surely they had to understand why he did what he did. He's not a bad guy. He just made a bad decision. It's unbelievable. The idea that Couzens was being forced into kidnapping a girl and handing her over to this Eastern European gang because he'd had a run-in with one of the girls at this Eastern European gang's brothels? What? It doesn't even make any sense. I mean, the idea that he really thought that rather than just admitting that he'd been paying for sex and reporting the gang to the police when they started to threaten him, he thought that abducting a girl and handing her over to a sadistic gang was a better option. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Obviously, the police aren't buying it either. And it just is further proof that Couzens is, for a police officer, somebody who should have been able to cover their tracks better, not a very smart man in terms of how he tries to get away with this.
No, and I genuinely think he thought he was going to.
Oh, 100%. 100%. But like we said, the police aren't buying it. And Couzens was arrested that night in connection with the disappearance of Sarah Everard. Remember, by this point, Sarah is missing. They do not have her body.
So, who is Wayne Couzens? And what, if any, warning signs were missed? Well, by the time he was arrested, Couzens was a married, 48-year-old police officer with 2 kids living in Deal in Kent. He was born in Dover on the 20th of December 1972, and he spent much of his life in that area. Friends from when he was growing up described Couzens as a weird kid. He seemed to live in his own little world, and he enjoyed extremely violent films and equally violent pornography. Once he even shot his friends in the legs when they were just teenagers. By 1989, when he was 17 years old, Wayne Couzens started working at his family business, a car garage. And again here, colleagues were put off by his love of porn, and he seemingly very openly shared that fact. In 2002, much to the relief of the other workers at the garage, Couzens left to join the Territorial Army, or the Army Reserves. From here, Couzens was able to move into the Kent Special Constabulary. So essentially, he became a part-time volunteer police officer with very limited powers. But soon, Couzens got a taste for law enforcement.
And now that he had his foot in the door, this enabled Couzens to move around within different policing units and jurisdictions with shocking ease and very little oversight. Can you believe that when he applied for his role with Kent Police, there wasn't even a mandatory requirement for forces to interview special officer applicants? Like, they didn't even have to talk to them. You know, just to sanity check who you're letting wear the uniform and represent the police to members of the public. You could just be like, oh, that's a special officer. to the member of the public who looks at that uniform, they don't know the difference.
No.
So the fact that you are willing to put people on the streets without vetting them thoroughly is a shocking oversight.
Yeah.
And it's diabolical that this man was allowed to go in and then just move around within the units. So during his time with the Kent police, no obvious red flags went up around Couzens that we know about anyway. Those who worked with him described Couzens as being overly deferential to authority. They said, quote, "He always had the shiniest boots." And I think you can see here that connection that Couzens is making with power and authority within the police. I think there is something there with Couzens about, like, I follow the rules, outwardly at least. I'm respectful of authority. I have the shiniest boots on the force. And in turn, he's going to expect that those that he administers to, i.e. the public, listen to him unquestioningly.
So after a few years with Kent Police in 2011, Wayne Couzens joins an armed police force, the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. It's essentially a unit within law enforcement made up of 1,500 officers or thereabouts who are charged with protecting civil nuclear sites and providing security when any nuclear materials are moved around within the UK. And unbelievably, despite this being an armed unit and the fact that all officers who join are given firearms training, there was barely any vetting done on Wayne Couzens. No clear psychological evaluation, nothing.
Yeah, it's like that because this particular unit within policing doesn't really interact with the public. They guard, like you said, nuclear sites. They provide protection when nuclear material is being moved around. So because they don't do that, they're just like, oh, we want to vet them. But you are giving them firearms training.
So, for the next 7 years, Couzens spent his life guarding power plants all over the country, usually in far-flung, isolated locations. But it was during this time that Wayne Couzens gained himself the cute little office nickname, the Rapist.
Yeah, and this is where any benefit of the doubt that I'm willing to give the police goes thoroughly out of the window. Because, look, I'm not here to be some cop fetishist. What I'm saying is the people that did the investigation into Sarah proved that good policing exists. Obviously it does, otherwise we'd be living in fucking Mad Max times. But this kind of shambolic lack of vetting, lack of oversight, lack of any kind of alarms being raised of a man who is exhibiting clearly problematic behaviour is the start of the very slippery slope that we're about to go down today.
Now, depending on when Wayne Couzens was branded with this particular label, we can take a pretty good guess as to why. If the nickname came after 2015, it was because that was the year that a man was reported for exposing himself. Yes, that is correct. Armed police officer Wayne Couzens was caught driving around Dover naked from the waist down. He was reported, but nothing was done. He should have been let go there and then, but he continued to work at the Civil Nuclear Constabulary for another 3 years.
We're going to talk about this at length in this episode, but how anybody in the police force, in this armed police unit, could have looked at that behaviour and thought it was anything short of deranged is honestly beyond me.
Yeah, it's really not the type of person you should be giving a gun to.
No. And in 2018, Wayne Couzens joined the London Metropolitan Police, the largest police force in the UK. Do you know what percentage of the total budget that we set aside for policing in this country the London Met get?
What percentage?
Yeah.
74.
No, it's 25, but it's absolutely massive. It needs to be, I mean, this is a separate conversation, but the London Met needs to be broken down. It's too big. It's completely unruly. It needs to be broken down into like 3 or 4 different units, but it is a massive gargantuan beast that is completely out of control, that nobody could have any oversight over. Certainly not the people that have tried to do so, at least. So yes, he joins the London Metropolitan Police, and as if this isn't horrifying enough, that a man who had been caught indecently exposing himself had just walked into the Met. Wayne Couzens, in fact, joined an elite unit within the Met, the one that Hannah told you about earlier, the Parliamentary Armed Unit. And again, no checks were done. And this is because of the massive and successive cuts that we've seen in this country to our public services, including to the police.
And I'll be honest, over the past few years here in the UK, we've definitely been importing a lot of American concerns, saying things like, defund the police. Now, in the US, most sane people who say this, I understand, mean demilitarize the police, and that would be a good thing there, though it is a poorly phrased slogan. But here in the UK, it makes no sense, and cutting funding for our police service when it comes to vetting, training, or pay helps no one.
The victims of underfunding the police will always disproportionately affect lower income people who are living in high crime neighbourhoods and need good policing. Not aggressive policing, not over the top policing, need good, well-funded policing. And you also have situations like this one with Wayne Couzens. Because when you cut police budgets, what happened in organisations like the Met is that they had a huge dearth of police officers with firearms training. Firearms training is expensive to give to officers. So they had a real shortage of police officers who had that kind of training. And after the 2017 Paris attacks, the London Metropolitan Police realised that they needed more armed cops. So this is the perfect point of weakness for somebody like Couzens to exploit. When Couzens applied for the Met and was able to say, I'm already a firearm trained officer, I worked at the Nuclear Civil Constabulary, they literally fucking bit his hand off because he was already trained. They didn't have to pay for it. So they took him into the Met without even looking at his record. And this is the kind of problem you have when you make huge public sector cuts, is you let people like this fall through the gaps.
And this point just can't be stressed enough. Wherever you have vulnerable people, wherever you have the power to be taken, you will get predators. That's a fact. It's a given. How many times have we talked about on this show people who crave power and authority and how they're drawn to roles like the police, the army, bouncers, security guards, that sort of thing? That is by no means to say that everyone in those jobs is a wrong, and obviously not. There are people who work those fields out of a sense of duty to serve. The issue is, what systems do our societies or our institutions have to root out the bad actors? But when cutbacks mean vetting processes are sidestepped, this is the mess that unfolds. And the stakes and dangers of recruiting the wrong people into the police are massive.
Now, none of this is letting the London Met or the police in general off the hook. I'm not saying, oh, look, they were so underfunded and that's why they let him in. That's a reason. That is absolutely a reason for why Wayne Couzens was able to walk into the Metropolitan Police. But even if cuts were made, there is rampant inefficiency in the Met in particular. It is absolutely massive. Like I said, it needs to be broken up into multiple different police forces if it has any hope of operating successfully. But that's a boring rant for another day. The point here is that there were multiple opportunities to stop Wayne Couzens before he killed Sarah Everard. This didn't happen out of the blue. There are situations where, yes, no one could have known, no one could have stopped something happening. This is not that case. Sarah could have been saved. And when you unpick the story, as trite as it sounds, honestly, this entire case is like watching a car crash in slow motion. And all of the signs were ignored. Nobody took responsibility. Nobody did the right thing. And the eventual response of Cressida Dick, the then Chief Commissioner of the Met, to say basically that it was just one bad apple was a major dick move, even for Cressida. Because of course it's not all police officers. Otherwise, like I said, we'd be fucked. But that one bad apple, as they put it, was allowed by continuous institutional failings and a total lack of any kind of reporting or whistleblowing or taking anything seriously to slip through the net time and time again until he ended up killing somebody.
Also, it's hardly just one bad apple. Like we said, a job in the police has the capacity to draw in a certain type of person. And it's also hardly just one incident where red flags are ignored. And actually, a Freedom of Information request to the UK police forces in 2023 found that in the last 4 years, 500 police officers and staff were reported for sexual assault. That is staggering. And 351 of those people are still serving today. And I'm afraid it just gets worse. The same request found that 2,715 police officers and staff had been reported for some sort of sexual offence in the last 5 years. And that 1,694 officers and staff had been reported for domestic abuse, 78% of whom are still serving on the force. And the cherry on the cake? In the last 6 years, 259 officers and staff have had multiple allegations of sexual offences made against them. 2 of these people have faced more than 15 allegations. So just one bad apple? I don't think so.
No. And it's like we said, this kind of role with this level of power and authority attracts people that are drawn to that. And letting the wrong person in then allows those people to abuse their power and get away with whatever they're doing. It is a horrible cycle. And again, like you said, it is inevitable that wherever you have power up for grabs, wherever you have vulnerable people, there's going to be people that want to take advantage of it. It's the fact that the institution of the police is so poorly equipped at rooting these people out is the problem. Now, perhaps you're wondering, lovely listeners, why, if so many police officers and people who work within the police forces in this country have been reported for sexual violence, why is it not constantly front page news? Well, it's because more often than not, the victims of these perpetrators are their spouses. And let's be honest, if Sarah had been in a relationship with Wayne Couzens, and he'd still been a police officer, and he had still raped and killed her, we probably never would have heard about it. It never would have ever even made the news. Because since 2009, 15 serving or former UK police officers have killed women. Most of these women were their partners, and that is why we haven't heard about any of them. And again, look, that is taking absolutely nothing away from what Sarah went through or the horrors of her murder. I'm not saying, oh, well, look, everybody heard about Sarah Everard and nobody cared about these. I'm saying what happened to all of these people is horrific. I'm just explaining why Sarah Everard made front page news and none of those women did. The murder of Sarah Everard became a national obsession of a story purely because it was so shocking, so extreme, and so unique. Stranger attacks are thankfully incredibly rare in this country, particularly against women, actually. Typically, men are much more likely to be victims of violent crime in the public, think bar brawls, etc. Women are much more likely to be killed in the home by their current or former intimate partners. And it is no different when it comes to the attacker being a cop. The added trauma here, when the abuser is a cop, is that while it is already an indescribably difficult task for someone in an abusive relationship to report that and then escape, imagine that your abuser is a police officer. Who would you go to? Who could you trust? It's an impossible and absolutely terrifying thought.
So yes, this tragic story unveiled yet more issues within policing in this country. It highlighted that the Met in particular is an institution seemingly incapable of and unwilling to deal with abusive officers and staff. And there exists a culture more concerned with arse covering than with safety of the public. And if you need more proof of this, one day after Wayne Couzens was arrested, another woman reported another Met officer of rape. And 7 months later, in October 2021, Dave Carrick was arrested.
Ugh, Dave Carrick is from Stevenage. So close to where I grew up.
Wow.
Yeah, and this was one of the cases where we did actually hear about a man who had abused his partner. But it's a very rare one. But I think it's just because of how extreme he was.
And David Carrick was also a Met police officer. He had actually worked in the Armed Parliamentary and Diplomatic Unit, alongside the rapist Wayne Couzens. What Dave Carrick did needs a whole episode itself to go through, but let's have a very quick and very grim rundown. Officer Dave Carrick was a serial abuser of women. He was in a relationship with a lady who we will call Claire. They met each other on a dating app in 2010. At first, things were great, but soon Dave the Bastard Carrick, which was his nickname at work alongside the rapist, told Claire, "I only ask one thing of you, that you obey me." And after that, Carrick began to regularly abuse Claire, physically, sexually, and emotionally. Carrick would often lock his terrified, naked partner in the cupboard under the stairs for days at a time. He would whip her with a belt, urinate on her, rape her, always anally, until she bled, reminding her every day, "I am the law." But Claire was far from his only victim. In his 17 years as a cop, Carrick abused countless women. He admitted to 71 incidents of sexual violence against 12 victims. And on the 7th of February 2023, Dave Carrick was sentenced to 30 years.
Now for the WhatsApp groups.
I hate this bit.
So just 6 weeks after Sarah's murder, with Wayne Couzens under arrest, investigators turned their attention to his colleagues. Jonathan Coburn, 35, William Neville, 34, and Joel Borders, 45. The men were looked into with regards to a WhatsApp group called Bottle and Stoppers / Atkins Puppets, which must be an in-joke because I don't understand what the references are to anything.
Neither.
And these men had been in this WhatsApp group with a strange name, with none other than Wayne Couzens.
And in this WhatsApp group, these officers had been sharing what's been described as racist, homophobic, and misogynistic messages. And yes, there's no doubt about that. They talk about their struggle snuggles after one of them pinned down a 15-year-old girl to the floor during an incident, and another suggested that he would rape and beat a named female officer. In a different conversation, these men also laughed at the idea of using tasers to torture animals and shooting people with Down syndrome.
All three men had also worked at the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, just like Wayne Couzens had. And all of them, just like Wayne Couzens had transferred to the London Metropolitan Police in February 2019. And look, I've read the texts. You can read the texts. They are out there. They're gross. I don't really want to go through them in a huge amount of detail here. But yeah, I don't know. Some people say, to be a police officer, you have to have a certain level of gallows humour, which, okay, fine. This is what the men claimed in court as well. And also, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we all don't say things in the safety of groups that we trust, with friends that we trust, make off-colour jokes or jokes that would otherwise get us cancelled if they, became public. And I don't think that people should be rounded up and imprisoned for jokes, however off-colour. But these men have real power. Their actions have consequences. These men were all firearms-trained police officers, and they were all in roles where they could have done the things that they were saying they were going to do. So, of course, that kind of thing cannot be ignored. I think, if you're going to be a police officer, the things that you're saying and the way that you conduct yourself with that kind of power comes responsibility, and therefore you need to be held to a different account and a different standard to your average person. And to be honest, I'm glad that 2 of those 3 officers were eventually sentenced to 3 months in prison.
And when you see these chats, if you do choose to go and find them, you also realise that that's why no one complained about Couzens. They just called him the rapist. WhatsApp chats like that were mutually assured destruction. If you start talking out of turn, rocking the boat, the other officers have a whole litany of nasty shit on you. And in an interview that we watched with a junior cop, he says, standing up to that kind of culture is impossible. You either have to take part or stay silent. So the whole WhatsApp chat part of this case, again, really highlights that culture of covering up and complicity within the police.
Yeah, I mean, if you're all in it, you're all in this chat like this. Even if you're not saying anything, you're associated with that conversation. You are immediately assuring yourself and everybody else that there's no way that you can point the finger at anybody else, because they're saying, look at the shit I've got on you. Are you really going to turn me into the higher ups? Mate, you've said far worse, etc., etc. And that's why that culture is so dangerous and so pervasive, because it serves a purpose.
Did you ever watch The Secret Policeman?
No, I didn't actually. No, I didn't.
It's a really good documentary about, I think it's the Manchester Met actually, and someone goes into the police academy undercover and films everything. And I mean, it's quite old now. I think I watched it at school, but it's all this sort of stuff, all of it. So it just goes to prove that this is not a new problem. In fact, this kind of thing, like the WhatsApp groups, was an open secret. After Wayne Couzens was discovered for what he was, the higher-ups told everyone just to delete everything. Get rid of all of the WhatsApp groups. We don't want to see it.
Yes, they knew that all of their police officers were in groups like this, saying stuff like this. And I get it. How many man-hours can they put aside to investigate all of their officers for all of these groups? So they're just literally delete everything.
Yeah,
we don't want to fucking know about it. Get rid of it all right now. But now, let's get back to the investigation into Wayne Couzens. After his bizarre story about the Romanian gang, the police had to follow up. But guess what? They found no trace of him on CCTV at any of the places he claimed that they had forced him to meet them. Because, in the interview that you heard, he's saying things like, they told me where to be. They were just like, you need to be here. You need to show up here or else we'll kill your family. But the police can't find any trace of him actually being in any of those places that he said that he was. What they did discover, however, was that using cell site data, they could track Couzens' movements from Dover to London and back again on the day that Sarah disappeared. They could place Couzens having arrived back on North Military Road, where he'd parked his car, with Sarah at 11:30 p.m. Here, he presumably forced Sarah out of the hire car and into his own vehicle. And we know this because just 12 minutes later, he was caught on CCTV driving his own car. He then drove Sarah out to the middle of nowhere.
Between 11:53 p.m. and 1 a.m., cell site data placed Couzens in the vicinity of Sibbetswold, a rural area of Dover. And this is where it is believed that Wayne Couzens raped and killed Sarah Everard, who is now more than 70 miles away from her home, having left to go and have dinner with a friend 2 miles away.
At 3:21 a.m., Couzens' car passed a camera near Hodes Wood, an 80-acre plot of woodland in Kent. It didn't take much digging for the police to discover that back in 2019, Couzens had actually bought a small plot of land in Hodes Wood. It had been advertised as the, quote, perfect place for day trips. But in reality, the area was a dumping ground, littered with abandoned cars, fridges, and all sorts of rubbish. Couzens had paid $5,000 in cash for this odd, dirty little spot of land. But now it made sense. And the purchase of this land back in 2019 also pointed at just how long Couzens may have been planning a kill.
Investigators also soon discovered that Couzens, before his arrest, had been taking his family for picnics to his plot of land in Hodes Wood. This wasn't typical for him. He had also apparently stopped going into work. He should have gone into work on the 6th of March, 2 days after the murder, but he didn't. He called his boss on the 8th and claimed that he wasn't feeling very well, saying he was stressed and he doesn't want to carry a gun anymore, so he needed some time off. To the police, it looked like he was cracking, and the constant trips to the woods may have been Couzens nervously checking in on his body disposal site. So, on the 10th of March, police went to search Hodes Wood. By 4:20 p.m. that day, they had found Sarah's remains.
Now, we don't know exactly what happened. This case never went to trial, and so a lot of information has never been made public. And also, Sarah's remains were so badly burned that she could only be identified by her dental records. What we do know is that Sarah was raped and strangled to death with a belt. The coroner reported that it likely would have taken 2 minutes of consistent pressure to kill Sarah that way. There was also DNA evidence that Wayne Couzens had used Velcro straps to restrain her. And after he killed Sarah, Wayne Couzens left her body in Hodes Wood, on his own fucking plot of land.
A few hours later, at 8:15 a.m, Couzens was caught on CCTV at a nearby Costa Coffee ordering a hot chocolate with coconut milk and a Bakewell tart. He looks totally chill and calm. He's just killed a woman and left her body in the woods, on land that he owns. And he's just as cool as can be. There's no hint of panic at all. An hour later, Couzens drove to Sandwich. As in the town in Kent, not the snack. There, he removed the SIM card from Sarah's phone and chucked it in a river.
Couzens then drove back to Hodes Wood, stopping only to buy a jerry can full of petrol. Once back on his fly-tipped land, he found an old abandoned fridge. Couzens then put Sarah's body inside this fridge and set it on fire using the petrol that he'd brought with him. He then made another trip to a DIY store, bought some heavy-duty rubbish bags, filled them with Sarah's now burned remains, and then dumped them in a pond about 100 feet from his land. And then he went about his life. Wayne Couzens went home and tried to act normal. He took the kids to dentist appointments. He even called the vet to talk about some concerns he was having with the family dog the day after he killed Sarah.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could book my dog in for the for the vet so I can have a discussion about her issues, please. It's Couzens, Couzens. Is Maddie. That's the one. No, that's fine. I work shift work, so either, let me think, but would it be possible the Friday the 12th, sometime after 3:30? That would be brilliant. Yep, no, that's fine. We think she's suffering from like separation anxiety, and we have tried absolutely everything. We've tried sort of like to give her puzzles and bits and pieces, treat puzzles and everything. We take her for walks every single day, but we've been told, I've got a camera set up as well, but we've been told reliably by our neighbours, so we know there's issues, and she just barks and howls constantly all day. But obviously, when we're there. And then when we come home, she's like so excited and worked up that she kind of wheezes and she's shaking. But where she jumps up and she's got longer claws, she like scratches the kids, she scratches us. Not all by accident, but we're just wondering. We have read online about if it gets to quite a bad degree of separation anxiety, then potential medications like try and calm her down. So that's what we want to talk to the vet about, really, and a way forward with it. Yep. Okay. That would be really appreciated. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So some people listen to that and they're like, oh my God, he cares more about this dog than he cares about the life of another human being. Well, firstly, yes, it is his dog. It's not unusual for people like Wayne Couzens to be able to form bonds with animals, especially dogs. They're loyal, they obey, and they love you no matter what. Even the most psychopathic individuals can love other creatures or people. It all comes down to the purpose they serve. But I don't think that's what the interesting thing is about this call to the vet. I think it's much more likely that Couzens, who was likely covered in scratches, needed an excuse as to why. Maybe someone had asked him what happened, and he lied that it was his dog. And now he wants to file a report with the vet to back this up, if anyone asks again later.
Following Couzens' arrest, vigils erupted in London, with women taking to the streets to highlight how unsafe they felt. And look, I get it. What happened here was a huge betrayal of the public. A police officer, a serving police officer, pretending to be on duty, had killed a woman that he had abducted off the streets using his own ID to quote-unquote arrest her. It's terrifying. But thankfully, it is incredibly rare in this country, and that's why we were so shocked by the Sarah Everard case. Predominantly in this country, as with much of the rest of the West, like I said, women typically are killed in their homes at the hands of their current or former intimate partners. In fact, at the time of Sarah's murder, of the 1,500 murders of women that had occurred in the previous 10 years, and I don't mean just as in, who cares, I mean 8% of those women had been killed by a stranger. That means 92% were not. And the overwhelming majority of those women were murdered by their partners or their exes. So I just want to put that into perspective because I don't want to perpetuate this feeling of women feeling like prey or constantly viewing ourselves as potential would-be victims when we're just out there living our lives. At the same time, though, I don't want to pretend that women aren't at risk of male violence. But we just have to put it into perspective. We have to put it into context. So yes, of course, anything can happen. As people who consume true crime, we all know that all too well. But we have to, all of us, balance our fears, our freedom, and the reality of the situation. And I guess my perspective is based a lot on the fact that I've also lived in a country where women are absolutely controlled by fear. In India, particularly rural India, and I understand that things are changing in the cities as women get more freedom, but in India, the cultural norm is good girls don't go out late. They don't go out alone. They don't drink. They don't dress immodestly. But saying that, there is also a very real and much more prominent danger of violence from stranger attacks in a country like India. And I wouldn't behave in India how I behave here, not just because of the cultural norms, but also because of the reality. Now, in the UK, that real actual risk of something happening to you, down to a stranger in public, is much lower. And I, speaking for myself, value my freedom. And I value that really highly because I very easily could have grown up in a country where I didn't have any of those things.
The question here isn't why did Wayne Couzens kill Sarah Everard? He's nothing special. He's like every other killer we've come across. Pathetic, deviant, selfish, empty, and a broken loser. The real question that we have to ask is how could this have been allowed to happen?
Yeah, I mean, everybody obsesses over this thing. It's like, why did he do it? Why did he do it? Why was this police officer doing it? I was like, that's not the fucking question. Listen to any episode we've ever covered. He is just a guy who happened to fall through the cracks and become a police officer. Why he did it is fucking because he's a selfish prick, like you just said. The really crucial part of this is how. And I think that's the bit we should all be really angry about.
And the rage that the public felt only got worse when more of the truth came out. Wayne Couzens had exposed himself publicly to more people than just the little drive he took around Dover in 2002 with his trousers off. Not that that incident shouldn't have been enough to get him kicked out of the police anyway. A few months before he killed Sarah, on the 13th of November 2020, whilst on duty, Wayne Couzens stepped out of a wooded area in Deal, his home fucking town, totally naked. And then he proceeded to wank himself off in front of a female cyclist.
He's a fucking Met police officer at this point. Can you imagine? He just walked out of the woods naked and starts wanking. How? Oh my God, it just gets so much worse. This is unbelievable.
And then, on the 14th of February, a few weeks before he killed Sarah Everard, Wayne Couzens went to the McDonald's drive-thru in Swanley with his trousers pulled down. He had his penis above his waistband. But he wasn't done. On the 27th of February, my brother's birthday, just 4 days before he killed Sarah, Couzens went back to the very same drive-thru. Only this time, he was completely naked from the waist down.
And completely erect. Ugh. On the second occasion that Wayne Couzens turns up at this McDonald's, the staff there actually call the police. And they even gave them Wayne Couzens' car registration and his credit card details with his fucking name on it. But no one called the victim or asked for a statement. Absolutely nothing was done about it. Why? Why are they ignoring this? It's not even just some random fucking pervert that's done it. He's a police officer and they know that he is. Unbelievably like this, Wayne Couzens racked up 6 offences for flashing that we know about. But he continued to be a serving police officer, an armed one, no less. I honestly can't keep stressing this enough. He should have been stopped after the first time. Because let's be clear, someone who flashes people and exposes themselves in public is not just some sort of harmless little, trench coat wearing deviant that's funny to laugh at. No. Exposing yourself like that belies a dangerous mentality, one of boundary pushing and getting a thrill out of exploiting someone else's discomfort and vulnerability. It should be seen as a serious and very real precursor to future violence and deviant behaviour. And we see it time and time again in the background of people who go on to kill. Did you know, Hannah, that until 2003 in this country exposing yourself wasn't even a crime?
I did not know that.
That is shocking.
That is shocking. Also, it seems highly unlikely that Wayne Couzens went from exposing himself to scared women straight to rape and murder overnight. It feels like there's a huge missing part of this story, one that we sadly can't fill today. Because the question that we cannot shake is what else has Wayne Couzens done? Rapists don't usually kill straight away, and killers like Couzens rarely start killing in their late 40s.
He was 48.
Yeah, no way. There must be more in his past, but we just don't know what. But I am certain that there are other women that he victimised who perhaps just haven't come forward.
So after his arrest, Couzens stayed completely silent for 3 months, flat out refusing to speak to anyone. But eventually, in June 2021, he pleaded guilty to the abduction and rape of Sarah Everard. And a month later, at the Old Bailey, he also pleaded guilty to her murder. Though he claimed that he had been depressed, sleeping badly, dealing with tinnitus, and huge amounts of stress because he was in over £29,000 worth of debt. Okay. He also claimed that he had never planned to kill Sarah. He had simply got confused. Okay, yeah, sure. With all of the planning that he had done, he had a fucking kill kit in his car.
Mm-hmm.
He said at the Old Bailey that he was only ever going to rape her. Even though, and this is the part that tells you everything you need to know about the fact that he wasn't just going to rape her. He had murder on his mind from the minute he saw Sarah, because he shows Sarah his face in that bus footage. He's not wearing a mask. He even shows her his fucking ID with his name on it. Do you really think he was just going to rape her and then let her go? She knew who he was.
Mm-hmm. So, as frustrating as it is, we'll never really know how Wayne Couzens thought he could explain everything away, because there was no trial, and Couzens was sentenced to a whole-of-life order because the judge rightly ruled that there were serious aggravating issues in this case. Normally, to get a whole-of-life order in this country, there needs to be more than 2 victims. But due to the serious planning involved here, the sexual nature of the crime, and crucially the fact that Couzens was an active police officer who was acting like he was on duty when he abducted Sarah, the judge was able to hand down the maximum sentence. The judge even placed this crime in an exceptional category, saying that although there was a lone victim, Couzens' actions were akin to committing an act for a political or religious motive, i.e. terrorism.
Which feels like a strange connection. But I think what the judge is saying here is that what you did caused such a level of public fear that it was akin to you acting as a terrorist, because you should have rightly known that as a serving police officer, to abduct using your ID, rape and murder a 33-year-old woman would have caused such public outrage and such public fear and public mistrust in the institution of the police that it is akin to terrorism. And that is what allowed that judge to sidestep the guidelines and give Wayne Couzens the whole-of-life order that he so thoroughly deserves. The judge also commented on the investigation, saying, like I said earlier, that it was the best and most extensive police investigation that he had ever seen. So we're talking here specifically about the team of detectives who investigated the disappearance of Sarah Everard. The judge also said that no officers who had worked on the murder of Sarah Everard tried to cover up the facts or slow down the investigation. And I have to say, from our research, that also appears to be true. Though, of course, we cannot simply forget the massive failings that led to Couzens remaining in his role as an officer for years. And Couzens, due to the seriousness of this case, was sentenced to a whole-of-life order, meaning that he will never be released from prison. And although it was decided not to go after Couzens for the WhatsApp group chat, in February 2023, Couzens was charged with 3 counts of indecent exposure. He pleaded guilty, and 19 months were added to his life sentence. But that's pretty much, I think it's a bit of a late gesture with all of that.
As of now, the Independent Office for Police Conduct is conducting an independent review into this case, and we're still waiting for the results. But the Met did decide to issue the public with some advice, following the concerns about safety following Sarah's murder. According to the Metropolitan Police, what should you do if you encounter an officer trying to arrest you? You should call 999 and ask, shout to a passerby, run into a house, or flag down a bus. I'd forgotten about that.
What the actual fucking fuck are they talking about? Firstly, if a police officer is trying to arrest me and I'm just like, hold on there, I'm going to call 999 and ask, what am I even hoping to ask there? And what help am I hoping to achieve? And also, they fucking tell you not to even call 999. Call 111 for basically everything, because everything is, again, so underfunded. Who's going to be dealing with my bloody call and everyone's call who calls to ask if they're allowed to be arrested? What an inefficient, stupid system. So leave that aside. Shout to a passerby. What, and hope that a passerby is some sort of legal expert? If somebody shouted to me, okay, let's just, role play this situation. You're walking down the road, minding your business. Somebody's being arrested by the police and they shout to you. Are you going to get involved?
Nope.
No, thank you. Please, officers, carry on with your day. I'm not going to get involved in that situation. Run into a house. What?
Yeah.
And again, if I'm living my life in my house and somebody bangs on my door saying that they're being arrested by the police, I would shut the door. And then finally, Flag down a bus. What, are we giving London bus drivers, or bus drivers generally, I'm saying London because this was advice given by the London Metropolitan, are we giving bus drivers in this country some sort of, I don't know, negotiation training? Are we giving them some sort of legal advice training? Like, what do we think a bus driver is going to be able to do in that situation? It is mind-boggling in its stupidity.
And it's terrifying that that's the best that they could come up with.
Yeah.
And again, look, we can't all live in a perfect world where we're always safe all the time. That's impossible. There will always be men like Wayne Couzens. And we've been doing this show long enough to know that he was always going to do what he did. But the fact that he was a police officer and that he was protected and the warning signs he was giving off were just ignored and made into a joke by calling him the rapist is horrifying. And the idea that police advice was to go against everything we're ever taught. We're taught to listen to authority, to comply if we're approached by the police, to follow orders.
Take lockdown itself. It was the clearest example of governments all over the world, ours very much included, having a little taste of authoritarianism. We were told to stay locked up in our houses for 2 years, to be quiet, come out and clap once a week for the NHS, say that we were all in it together. All as we watched our economy fall off a cliff, people's mental health go with it, children sitting at home, out of school for years, domestic abuse and child abuse go through the roof, along with preventable deaths from other conditions like cancer absolutely skyrocket. All that complicity that was demanded of us absolutely enabled Couzens to do what he did. We all watched on the news every night as the police, using those weird, unkeepable COVID laws, hammer the public, arresting people for going on walks, throwing homeless people out of parks, screaming at people having coffees with a friend outside. Do you remember when you saw that footage of people being chased by the police around national parks with drones? What harm were they doing anybody? Except not to themselves because their mental health wasn't going to fly into a fucking wall. I mean, what the fuck? We allowed that to happen. And those who protested and any dissenting voices that were out there were quickly deplatformed or quite literally punched in the face by police at rallies. So when you take all of that into account, of course Sarah wouldn't have felt sure enough in herself to challenge her arrest by Couzens. The laws at the time were so bizarre. Mm-hmm. I remember leaving my house and being like, can I go outside? How long can I be outside for? Have I been out once already today? Am I going to get arrested if I go out again? It is not hyperbolic to say that we were living in a state of fear. And so on what basis would Sarah, alone, at night, what confidence would she have had to turn to Wayne Couzens and say, no, you can't arrest me? She would have believed it because it was all so fucking bonkers. Also, Couzens had been working on enforcing the lockdown laws for months by that point. He was well versed in what he needed to say to Sarah. And even if he hadn't, he had the police ID. And none of us understood what the hell we could and couldn't do day to day anyway. So of course Sarah Everard complied, and she died for it. And that should enrage each and every one of us.
And if that doesn't do it, Sarah's family's impact statements will. They told the world about their beautiful, kind, smart and driven Sarah. She was born in Surrey in 1987. She grew up in York, and then she went to Durham for university. Sarah had moved to London for work and got a new job as a marketing manager at a digital agency. She was excited about the future. Her and her boyfriend Josh had been together for a couple of years and they were planning a holiday to Ibiza in the summer. And they were talking about moving in together. Sarah had her entire life ahead of her, and it was all taken from her. Sarah's mum, Susan, stood in court and faced down her daughter's killer and read the following.
Ugh, and honestly, this is just one of the worst things I've ever read. I'm tormented at the thought of what she endured. She spent her last hours on this earth with the very worst of humanity. She lost her life because Wayne Couzens wanted to satisfy his perverted desires. It is a ridiculous reason. It's nonsensical. How could he value a human life so cheaply? I cannot comprehend it. I am incandescent with rage at the thought of it. He treated my daughter as if she was nothing and disposed of her as if she was rubbish. In the morning, I wake up to that awful reality that Sarah is gone. In the evenings, at the time she was abducted, I let out a silent scream. Don't get in the car, Sarah. Don't believe him. Run.
Fucking hell. That's grim.
It's so awful.
Oh.
Yeah. So we really started the year off here with a cheery case, but I think this was a particularly timely one because it's not like the anniversary or anything the time you're listening to this, but I think the COVID reviews are currently underway, and they are as much of a whitewashing fucking cover-up as you could expect from a government that went full force down the road of lock up, lock up, lock up. They will not listen to any evidence that suggests that they made mistakes with regards to this. And so while it may be, I don't know, people might find it hyperbolic to say this, I really don't think. The headlines around the Sarah Everard murder that read things like, while Westminster partied, Sarah Everard was being murdered. I think that Wayne Couzens is a piece of shit and he was going to hurt somebody at some point. But we enabled this thing to happen, and it is absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
And that is not to mention all of the other people's whose lives were massively also destroyed by lockdown. So a strong start for us at Red Handed. But yeah, it was just one we were going to have to do at some point, and it is now done. That is the case of Sarah Everard. Now, yes, don't be angry forever. We'll be back next week with something else. And yeah, Happy New Year, guys.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Look after yourself.
Yes. And if somebody yells at you when they're being arrested, I don't know, presumably look after them, but I don't know how you do that. So yeah, we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.